Welcome to the MasterMind Library. They call me Ferdinand, the leader of many disciplines, bringer of balance, and the host of the MasterMind Library, the home of the MasterMind Book Club. And as y'all see, Trigger is here with us again. He'll soon be reading the MasterMind Library himself one day. So we've been in the science of mind, as y'all know, and we've been diving deep into it. Today's episode 65 is focused on the law of psychic phenomena. I believe our last episode, we were in the perfect whole, and it was going more into spirit, more into the understanding of what happens during meditation. And today we're going to go into the world of the psychic. So let's go ahead and move forward in our book to where we need to be at, and we'll make it a little bit larger for everybody. All right. Introduction. All right, let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. And let's change this over. All right, boom, there we go. It is taken for granted that the average person of today is more or less acquainted with the facts concerning psychic phenomena. It would be useless in a course such as this to attempt any exhaustive research work. This has already been done by those eminently able to furnish the data. There is within man a power that can communicate without the tongue, hear without the ear, see without the eye, talk without the mouth, move ponderable objects and grasp things without the hand, and perform many other feats that are usually connected only with the physical instrument. All these facts have been completely proved, and it is no longer necessary to produce evidence to substantiate these facts. While the above stated facts have all been proved, the reason for their being has not been so thoroughly or logically discussed, and it is the purpose of this article to explain the fundamental reasons behind the law of mental action, which is called psychic. For if a thing happens, there must be a reason for its happening and a law through which it operates. The only excuse for taking up this topic in a course of lessons in mental science is that, being the phenomena of mind, it should come under the category of known mental actions. Psychic phenomena and immortality. Psychic phenomena are closely associated with immortality in people's minds for the reason that they deal with those unseen powers which we think of as being attributes of the soul, and also because many people have attributed the phenomena largely to the agency of discarnate spirits. No apologies. While no apologies are made for the ensuing pages, yet, in justice to the truth, it must be said that many of the world's eminent scientists have investigated the subjects to be discussed, and so far, to the author's knowledge, none of them have ever refuted the ensuing facts. The powers which are exhibited through the psychic life do really exist in man, and someday he will make conscious use of them and will, thereby, be greatly benefited. Meanwhile, everyone is urged to be most careful in his approach to the subject. A little knowledge is a very dangerous thing, and it is to be regretted that very few people exhibiting psychic powers appear to know what the law is that underlies the phenomena. Many are led astray through ignorance, and one should be most careful in handling the topic. But, as stated above, this subject, coming under the known laws of mental action, must be dealt with. God has given us a mind with which to know, and a power with which to discern the truth. And it is a terrible mistake to misuse that power. The whole end and aim of evolution is to produce a man who, in his self-conscious state, may depict the divine nature. We can do this only to the degree that we remain ourselves at all times. We will take up the study of this subject just as we would approach the study of another law, with an open mind. without any substitution and free from any sense of the unnatural. Nature is always natural, and only those things are mysterious which we do not understand. Metaphysical meanings of words used in chart number 6. The upper section represents the conscious mind, the self knowing mind, which we call spirit. The middle section represents the psychic sea, that is, the subjective world. This is the world of thought forms and mental pictures. This has been called the illusion of mind because it contains many pictures, which are pictures only and have no real form behind them. As a picture that is hung on the wall is not really a person, but is simply a picture. So the psychic sea may contain pictures which, while they are real as pictures, are not real from any other sense. It does not follow that everything in the psychic world is an illusion, for it contains much that is true. We should be very careful to distinguish the false from the true. The lower section of the chart represents the objective world. This world also reflects many false forms, such as disease and limitation. They are not things of themselves, but are the results of wrong mental pictures in the subjective world. Neither the psychic pictures nor the world of forms are self creative. Both are effects. This is the psychic's chart and should be carefully considered as it shows that the spirit or conscious mind operates through a mental field or law, which is a world of reflections. Thought is first reflected into mind and then into matter. Read again the meaning of the conscious and the subconscious aspects of being. The world of subjectivity is the psychic sea and the medium of all subjective action. From the standpoint of man's thoughts, it may be false or true, according to the way in which he thinks. It is the picture gallery of the soul, both from the universal and the individual sense. The illusion of matter means that the false mental pictures will produce a false form in the world of objectivity. Mind is not an illusion, but might contain false pictures which would be illusions. Matter is not an illusion, but may take on false conditions. We must learn to separate the false from the true. Spirit or conscious mind, one and only knowing, power in God or man. The psychic see, subjective, false or true, mirror of mind, medium of all psychic phenomena, thought forms or mental pictures, objective, illusion of matter, false or true, mirror of matter. Lesson 6, metaphysical chart number 6, psychic phenomena. Psyche means soul. Psychic phenomena are the phenomena of the soul. We have already seen that what we call the soul is really the subjective part of us. We do not have two minds, but we do have a dual aspect of mentality in what we call the objective and subjective phases of mind. The objective mind is that part of the mentality which functions consciously. It is the part of us which really knows itself. And without it, we would not be real of conscious entities. The subjective mind. Our subjective mind is our mental emanation in universal subjectivity. It is our individual use of mental law. It is also the avenue through which instinctive man works, carrying on the functions of the body, for it is the silent builder of the body. The subjective mind of the individual is the working of instinctive man within him, plus all of his conscious and subconscious experiences. Seat of memory, the subjective seat of memory and of instinctive emotion. Being the seat of memory, it contains a remembrance of everything that has ever happened to the outer man. This memory is perfect and retains every experience of the individual life. The subjective mind also contains many of the family and race characteristics which have been experienced by individualized man. It retains these memories, partly at least, as mental pictures or impressions. This is proven by the fact that pictures have been taken of the subjective thought and definite outlines developed. This does not necessarily mean that every impression is retained as a mental picture, but that, in all probability, anything that the outer eye has definitely seen is retained as a more or less distinct picture. The subjective mind is a picture gallery, upon whose walls are hung the pictures of all the people whom the individual has ever known, and all the incidents which he has ever experienced. Suggestion and subjectivity. The subjective mind, being deductive only in its reasoning powers, is compelled by its nature to retain all the mental impressions that it has ever received. It, therefore, contains much that the objective mind has never consciously known. When we realize that the individual's subjectivity is his use of the one subjective mind, we shall see that a subjective unity is maintained between all people, and that individual mentalities, which are in sympathetic vibration with each other, must more or less mingle and receive suggestions from each other. This is the meaning of mental influence, which is indeed a very real thing. This also means that the subjective mind receives suggestions from the race and is more or less influenced by its environment. All this takes place on the silent side of life and is mostly unknown to the receiver. Race suggestion is a very real thing, and each individual carries around with him and has written into his mentality many impressions that he never consciously thought of or experienced. For there is a silent influencer going on, a silent influence going on at all times between people under this law. Subjective communication. It is almost certain that between friends there is, at all times, a silent communication, a sort of unconscious mental conversation going on subjectively. When this rises to the surface of conscious intelligence, it is called mental telepathy. This communication with others is going on at all times, whether the conscious mind is aware of the fact or not. We are always receiving impressions that are more or less vague, and it is seldom that they come to the surface, but they are there nevertheless and are gradually building into our mentalities impressions and forms of thought that are unconsciously and silently perceived. Subjective mind and inspiration. Since the subjective mind is the storehouse of memory, it retains all that the eye has seen, the ear heard, or the mentality conceived. Since it conceives much that the outer man never consciously knew, and is the receptacle of much of the race knowledge through unconscious communication, it must and does have knowledge that far surpasses the objective faculties. Realizing that the subjective draws to itself everything that is in sympathy with or vibrates to, we see that anyone who is sympathetically inclined toward the race or vibrates to the race thought might pick up the entire race emotion and experience. And if he were able to bring it to the surface, he could consciously depict it. Many of the world's orators, actors, and writers have been able to do this, which explains the reason why many of them have been so erratic. For they have been more or less controlled by the emotions which they have contacted. Our greatest speakers are able to contact the subjective mentality of their audiences, and in this way, not only tell the audience what it wishes to be told, but also to send out a strong vibration that will make an equally strong subjective impression on those who are listening. It is a well known fact that many speakers are able to connect with the mentality of an audience in such a manner as to be able to completely control it. Napoleon seemed to be able to do this, which was one of the reasons why he had such tremendous influence over his followers. Singers and poets generally enter into more or less of a subjective state while singing or writing. In the case of a singer or actor, this enables him to respond to the emotion of his listeners and to be able to reflect back to them an equally strong emotion. It might work the other way. That is, he might himself awaken the emotion in his hearers. This we call temperament, and no singer, speaker, or actor can be a great success without it. In the case of a writer, this enables him to enter into the race thought and perfectly depict race emotion and race endeavor. Poets especially poets are an especially good example of this ability. For poetry, like song, is the language of the soul, and none can write good poems unless he allows the soul to come to the surface. We could not imagine a great poem written mechanically. Artists lose themselves in their work, and musicians often do the same. This we call inspiration. In preaching, it is probable that the orator of the pulpit often so enters into the longings of men's hearts that he reveals them to themselves. He is able to depict their thoughts and emotions, and coupling his own with theirs, give birth to a great discourse. We say that he is inspired. Anyone contacting the subjective side of the race mentality with the ability to permit it to come to the surface will have at his disposal a knowledge that many lifetimes of hard study could not possibly accumulate. But if one had to surrender his individuality in this process, he would be better off to remain ignorant. Enough has been said on this subject to show the source of human inspiration. There is, of course, a much deeper seat of knowledge than the subjective mind, that is, the spirit. But direct contact with the spirit is illumination and is a quality which has been developed in but few people. The few who have developed this quality have given the world its greatest literature, religion, and law. Mental atmospheres. Each person has a mental atmosphere which is the result of all that he has thought, said, done, and consciously or unconsciously perceived. This mental atmosphere is very real and is that subtle influence which constitutes the power of personal attraction. For personal attraction has but little to do with looks. It goes much deeper and is almost entirely subjective. This will explain the likes and dislikes for those with whom we come in daily contact. We meet some only to turn away with a word, while others we are at once drawn toward, and without any apparent reason. This is the result of their mental atmosphere or thought vibration. No matter what the lips may be saying, the inner thought outspeaks them, and the unspoken word often carries more weight than the spoken. As Emerson said, what you are speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. In contacting people, we are instantly attracted or repelled according to the vibrations which we feel. A person whose atmosphere is one of love and sunshine, whose nature is to be happy, who lives a clean, wholesome life in a free atmosphere, will always attract friends. Children feel mental atmospheres very keenly and are drawn to those who are inwardly right, shunning those who are inwardly wrong. It has been truly said that people whom children and dogs do not like are dangerous. Animals are almost entirely subjective and feel mental atmospheres more keenly than do most people. A dog instinctively knows one's attitude toward him and, acting accordingly, is immediately a friend or foe. Personal atmospheres vary in their intensity, there being as many varieties as there are people, for each creates his own atmosphere in mind. How to create personal charm? Personal charm may be easily created by learning to love all and hate none. Truly, did the great Emerson say, if you want a friend, be one. If one wishes to have friends, he should become friendly. If he wishes love, he should learn to love. There is no excuse for anyone being without a power of attraction, since it is a mental quality and may be consciously induced through right practice. The atmosphere of places. As all people have a mental atmosphere, so do all places. And as the atmosphere of people is the result of their thoughts. So the atmosphere of places is the result of the thoughts they have that have been created in them. Places are permeated with the thoughts of the people who inhabit them. In this way, mental atmospheres are created and may be easily felt by those contacting them. How often have how often we have had the experience of going into a place only to feel that we were not wanted and become so disturbed that we wished immediately to leave. How often, on the other hand, we have gone into places where we felt such warmth and inner glow that we wished to remain. This is the result of the mental atmosphere surrounding the place or room. This is why we love our homes. They are filled with love and affection, and we feel at peace within their walls. This is why one likes to return home after his day's work, for he knows that here is a place where he will be away from the world with all of its cares and worries. It is a wise wife who understands this law and who keeps the atmosphere of the home pleasant. Such a one will seldom lose her mate, but will hold him through the strong tides of love and affection with which she floods his abode. Many an unhappy home could be harmonized if this law were better understood and practiced. The atmosphere of the home should never be clouded with the uncertainties of the outside world. Here, in the palace of human love, all else should be forgotten and an atmosphere maintained which will be a shelter from the world. Here, love should be the ruling passion and harmony should reign supreme. Here, above all places, should the kingdom of God be established, and families should dwell together in peace and joy. Too often, jealousy and deceit rob the home of its joy, while mistrust and doubting make it so unpleasant that it becomes an impossible place in which to live. But all this can be changed by reversing the wrong thoughts and in their place creating thoughts of love and tenderness toward one another. Close that door. There is nothing more unfortunate for a child's mind than to be compelled to live in an unhappy home. The love should stand for heaven on earth. And unless it does, the home should stand for heaven on earth. And unless it does, it will not stand long, but will be buried in the ashes of dead hopes. The atmosphere of the desert is wonderful, for it is free from the thoughts of men's confusion and fear. And so is a place of great peace. Here, indeed, away from the haunts of men's terrible struggles, quiet may be found and peace regained. It is the same with the mountains, the lakes, and the trackless deep. This is what we love about nature, her marvelous calm and deep peace, for she speaks to us and tells us of a life undisturbed by the strife of man. She does indeed bear a message from on high, and happy is the one who can talk to her and learn from her, for she is wonderful and filled with light. Even the slightest things seem to be possessed of a soul or subjective atmosphere. How often we see a familiar coat or hat hanging on a peg, while in it we seem to see the person who wears it. It seems to look like him, or so it does, for it retains the emanation of his atmosphere and really is permeated with his personality. Everything has an atmosphere which we sense and to which we react accordingly. If it is pleasant, we like it. And if unpleasant, we dislike it. The race mind. Just as each person, place, or thing has a subjective atmosphere or remembrance, so each town, city, or nation has its individual atmosphere. Some towns are bustling with life and action, while others seem dead. Some are filled with a spirit of culture, while others seem filled with a spirit of commercial strife. This is the result of the mentalities of those who live in these places. A city given over to the pursuit of the higher endeavors will react with an atmosphere of culture and refinement, while one whose dominant thought is to acquire wealth will react to an atmosphere of grasp and grab. This is very definite and is felt by all who enter such places. Just as a city as its atmosphere, so does a whole nation. For a nation is made up of the individuals who inhabit it, and the combined atmospheres of all the people who inhabit a nation creates a national mentality, which we speak of as the psychology of that people, the mind of history. When we remember that subjective mind is universal, we will come to the conclusion that the history of the race is written in the mental atmosphere of the globe on which we live. That is, everything that has ever happened on this planet has left its imprint on the walls of time. And could we walk down their corridors and read their writings, we should be reading the race history. This should seem simple when we realize that the vibrations of the human voice can be preserved in the receptive phonographic disc and reproduced at will. If we were to impress one of these discs with the vibration of someone's voice and lay it away for 1,000,000 years, it will still reproduce those vibrations. It is not hard then to understand how the walls of time may be hung with the pictures of human events, and how one who sees these pictures may read the race history. Slave down. You are definitely not time for you. Yes, you can. All right, let's set this down. You can come sit on my lap. You got to put a blanket on top of the tree, so you'll stay asleep. All right, hold on. Let me come over here first. Okay, come on, boo boo. Let's keep going. All right, telepathy. Telepathy, or thought transference, is such a commonly known fact that it is useless to do other than to discuss it briefly. However, there are some facts which might be overlooked unless we give them careful attention. The main fact to emphasize is that mental telepathy would not be possible unless there were a medium through which it could operate. This medium is universal mind, and it is through this medium that all thought transference or mental telepathy takes place. Forms in matter and solid bodies may begin and end in space, but thought is more fluent. Telepathy is the act of reading subjective thought or of receiving conscious thought without audible words being spoken. But there must be a mental tuning in, so to speak, just as there must be in radio. We are surrounded by all sorts of vibrations, and if we wish to catch any of them distinctly, we must tune in. But there is a great deal of interference, and we do not always get the messages clearly. We often get the wrong ones, and sometimes many of the vibrations come together and seem to be nothing but a lot of noises, without any particular reason for being. It is only when the instrument is properly adjusted to some individual vibration that a clear message may be received. This is true of mental telepathy, which is the transmission of thought. The receiver must tune in with the sender. It does not follow, however, that the sender knows that he is being tuned in on. In other words, one might pick up thoughts just as he picks up radio messages. And just as the one broadcasting may not know who is listening in, so the one sending out thought may not know who is listening in. Happily, but few people can listen in mentally, and these few only with more or less certainty of success. It would be terrible to be compelled to listen in on all the thoughts that are floating around. But fortunately, we can only receive those messages to which we vibrate. And so the whole thing is a matter of our own choice. We are individuals in the mental world just as in the physical, and a wise person will protect himself mentally just as he would physically, tuning in on thought. Some seem to have the ability to tune in on thought and to read it, much as one would read a book. These people we call psychics, but all people really are psychic, since all have a soul or subjective mind. What we really mean is that a psychic or medium is one who has the ability to objectify that which is subjective, to bring to the surface of conscious thought that which lies below the threshold of the outer mind. The medium reads from the book of remembrance, and it is marvelous how far reaching this book of remembrance is. Mental pictures. As everything must exist in the subjective world before it can in the objective, and as it must exist there as a mental picture, it follows that whatever may have happened at any time on this planet is today within its subjective atmosphere, i.e., the experiences of those who have lived here. These pictures are hung upon the walls of time and may be clearly discerned by those who can read them. Accordingly, since the universal subjectivity is a unit and is indivisible, all these pictures really exist at any all these pictures really exist at any and every point within it simultaneously. And we may contact anything that is within it at any point, because the whole of it is at every point. Consequently, we may contact at the point of our own subjective mind, which is a point in universal subjective mind, every incident that ever transpired on this planet. We may even see a picture that was enacted 2,000 years ago in some Roman arena, for the atmosphere is filled with such pictures. This has been called the illusion of mind, the psychic see. This does not mean that mind is an illusion, but that it might present us with an illusion unless we are very careful and are quite sure that what we are looking at is a real form and not simply a picture. It is very important that we understand this, for each person in his objective state is a distinct and individualized center in universal mind. But in his subjective state, everyone in his stream of consciousness or at his rate of vibration is universal because of the indivisibility of mind. Wherever and whenever any individual contacts another upon the subjective side of life, if he is psychic, i.e., if he objectifies subjectivity, he may see a thought form of that person, but it does not necessarily follow that he would be really seeing the person. Conditions necessary for the best results. The conditions necessary for the best results in psychic work are faith and expectancy. For the subjective responds to faith and seems clouded by doubts. Doubt appears to throw dust in its eyes, while sympathetic faith and willing belief render the veil much thinner and the consequent messages much clearer. This explains why many unbelieving investigators fail to receive the desired results and go away saying that the whole thing is a fraud. Whatever the nature of the subjective may be, we did not make and we cannot change it. We shall be compelled to use this force, like all other forces in nature, according to its own laws, and not according to the way we think it should act. It has been completely proved that the subjective mentality responds more completely when fully believed in. And anyone wishing to investigate the psychic life would much better accept this fact and act upon it, rather than dispute it and receive no results. If the law is complied with, the results will if the law is complied with, the results will be certain. Some psychics go into a trance while giving subjective readings, while some can do this in a normal state. The trance state varies from a slight subjectivity to a completely submerged mentality, i.e., from simply getting in tune with thought while in a conscious state of mind to becoming completely submerged in a unconscious state in order to get in tune with thought. It is never good to lose one's self-control, but many people do this and, in so doing, have brought to light remarkable evidence of the ability of the inner mind to perform wonderful tasks. Deep telepathic messages. It is possible at times for a psychic to tell one most of the incidents that have happened in his life, and also to tell of his friends and many of the incidents that have happened to them. This is done by entering the subjective realm of the individual and reading the thoughts and mental pictures that are hung on the wall of his memory. When a psychic tells one something about his friends, he is entering their thought through the sympathetic vibration of the one whose thought he is reading. We are always in mental contact with our friends on the subjective side of life, and a psychic tuning in on on these vibrations sends the thoughts that come over the mental wireless, reading the history of the individual. Often a psychic will enter a person's mentality and give him a fairly complete history of his past and of the family from which he came, going back, perhaps, for several generations, naming ancestors and the things that engaged their attention while on earth. He is reading the records of what has already happened and is a subjective remembrance of his family. For instance, people have often said to me, I saw Emerson standing behind you this morning. Of course, they did not see Emerson. What they saw was a mental picture of him. The reason being that I am a student of Emerson, and each is surrounded by the forms of the people he knows and the forms of those whose thought he studies. Personal readings. One is surprised when he goes to a medium and is told his own and perhaps his mother's name, and is told by the medium that his mother stands beside him. The psychic often tells just how she looked while in the flesh. Now, it might or might not be that what the medium says is true, for while this personality might be consciously near, the chances are more than even that she is not, but that the medium is simply looking at a picture of her as she once was while in the flesh. A medium might, by reading one's subjectivity, be able to tell something about people who were not present at the time, because each, through a sympathetic vibration of thought, is connected with the subjective emanations of those whom he likes, of those with whom he is associated, and of those to whom he vibrates. These people might be in the flesh or out of it. The personal reading appears to be limited either by the immediate individual or to someone with whom he is in contact. The value of subjective mind reading is more or less uncertain. Generally, all that a psychic can tell is about something that has already happened or something that might happen as the result of a subjective tendency already set in motion. There are, however, deeper messages than these. Streams of consciousness. Each, being an individual identity in mind, is known by the name he bears and by the vibration which he emanates. For, while we are all one in mind and spirit, we each have a separate and an individualized personality. This is the only way that spirit can individualize, making it possible for many to live in the one. Each, then, is represented by his stream of consciousness, and each consciously functioning in mind builds around himself an aura or mental atmosphere, which in its turn is constantly flowing out as a stream of consciousness. Because of the unity of mind, each is one with the all, and at the point where he contacts the all, he universalizes himself. This will be easily understood when we realize that man always uses the one mind. He is in it and thinks into it. And because it is universal, his thoughts may be picked up by anyone who is able to tune in on that thought. Just as we pick up radio messages. A radio message broadcast from New York City is immediately present all around the world. Hard as this concept may be to grasp, we know it to be the truth. Let us shift the basis to mentality, and we shall see that the same thing happens when we think. we think into the one mind, and this thought is immediately present everywhere. It is in this sense that each one is universal. According to the unity of mind, thought is everywhere present, and so long as it persists, it will be. What is known in one place may be known in all places. No obstructions to thought. Time, space, obstructions are unknown to mind and thought. It follows, then, that anyone tuning in on our thought will enter into our stream of consciousness, no matter where we are or where he may be. And if we still persist after the body shall have suffered the shock of physical death, this law must still hold good, for past and present are one and the same in mind. Time is only the measure of an experience, and shape of itself is not apart from, but is in mind, entering the stream of thought. A psychic can enter the stream of thought of anyone whose vibration he can mentally contact, be that person in the flesh or out of it. And since we are all psychic, all having a soul element, we are all, doubtless, communicating with each other to the degree that we sympathetically vibrate toward each other. This explains the medium through which absent treatment takes place. We do not all have the ability to objectify psychic impressions, and ordinarily they come to the surface. However, they are there just the same. This is the reason why we often feel so uneasy when in the presence of certain people or when we mentally contact some condition, having an uneasy inner feeling but without any apparent reason. The vibration of a book. As we read and study people's thoughts, we gradually enter into the current of their curiousness. Excuse me. As we read and study people's thought, we gradually enter into the current of their consciousness and begin to read between the lines. We are unconsciously reading their inner mentalities. This is why we enjoy reading the thoughts of the great mentalities of all ages. More that is unwritten comes to us than mere words could possibly convey. Why saints have seen Jesus. Excuse me. Many of the saints have seen Jesus in this way. That is, through studying his words and works, they have so completely entered his thought that they have seen a picture of him. For the pictures of everything and everybody are hung on the walls of time, and anyone who can enter may read. It does not follow that these saints have seen Jesus, but that they have, without doubt, seen his likeness, or what the world believes to be his likeness, hung on the walls of time. When we look at a picture of a person, we are not looking at the person, but at a likeness of him. All right, you ready to lay down? Okay. Many mental pictures. We are surrounded by mental pictures. And a good psychic sees. Let's see. We got some comments. Oh, yeah, it's live. It's live, Mishnah. Yep. Hello, how you doing? Thanks for tuning in. All right, let's get back to the reading. Okay, many mental pictures. We are all surrounded by mental pictures, and a good psychic sees these mental pictures clairvoyantly and reads our thoughts telepathically. A good medium has the ability, more or less clearly, to bring these pictures and thoughts to the surface and objectify them. But it does not follow that he is really communicating with the people whose pictures he sees. The human aura. Everyone constantly radiates some kind of a vibration, and consequently is always surrounded by some kind of a mental atmosphere. This is called the aura. It extends from a few inches to a few feet from the body and sometimes even further. It varies in color and density with the varying degrees of consciousness. In moments of spiritual realization, the aura is bright yellow, merging into almost a pure white. And in moments of rage, it is dark and murky in appearance. There are as many colors in the aura as there are varying degrees of thought activity in the mentality. Halo. The halo which artists have portrayed around the heads of the saints is real and not an idea of the artist. There is a more pronounced emanation from the head than any other part of the body because thought operates through the brain more than through any other part of the human instrument. It is said that the face of Jesus shone so brightly at times that his disciples could not look upon it without becoming blinded by its brilliancy. Unpleasant atmospheres. In a combat of wills, that atmosphere sometimes appears to strike sparks as though a battle were being waged on the subjective side of life. Unpleasant people always have a disagreeable atmosphere, and morbid people always depress. A radiant aura emanates from the one who lives a normal, happy life and who is always at peace within himself. Habit. Habits are formed by first consciously thinking and then unconsciously acting. But few realize that when one consciously thinks, something must happen to his thoughts. What one thinks today will tomorrow be a part of his memory. And since memory is active, what he thinks today as a conscious thought will tomorrow be submerged, but active thought. This is how a habit is formed. First, it is a desire. Then comes the expression of this desire. Then the desire becomes subjective, and the subconscious action of thought causes it to be performed automatically. First, we control thought. Then thought controls us. First, the man takes a drink. Then the drinks take a drink. Then the drink takes the man. Conscious repetition gradually forms such a thought force on the subjective side of life that the very force created, in its turn, controls the one who created it. How careful we should be about what we let down into the deeper currents of mentality. All habits are formed in much the same way. They are at first conscious, then they become unconscious or subconscious. A person may create such a strong desire that it will compel him to put it into execution. This is called mania. Literally speaking, mania is a desire too strong to be controlled. We speak of one having a mania for certain things. That is, he is subjectified so much desire along some particular line that he becomes controlled by the very power which he has set in motion. Morbid people are more liable to do this than normally minded ones. For instance, let a sensitive person become despondent and he may think of committing suicide. This thought, at first, may be put aside as unworthy, but as it returns, it receives a little more attention until at last it may become so strong that it is irresistible. Most murderers are committed from this mental attitude, and most murderers are people who are mentally sick. Someday this will be better understood. Such people will be considered sick and will be healed mentally. This shows how very careful we should be to control our thinking, never allowing the mentality to conceive ideas which we do not wish to see manifest. After all, these things are mental attitudes, and the best way to heal them is through mental treatment. Obsession. Excuse me. Yes, obsession. Obsession is another form of mental control and may or may not be conscious at its inception. People may become obsessed with desires, thoughts, ambitions, habits, suggestions, or other mental influences. And if the spirit of undeveloped entities around us, and if the spirits of undeveloped entities surround us, it seems entirely possible that people may become obsessed by them. The obsession of desire produces a mania to express that desire, for thought demands an outlet. Some are so obsessed by their ambitions that they are constantly driven to the accomplishment of them. Some are obsessed by the suggestion of their environment, for the mental atmosphere of places often obsesses people, compelling them to do certain things and without any apparent reason. In studying a case of obsession, we should take all the facts into consideration and reason from effect back to cause. Personal influence and obsession. People often become mildly obsessed by the mentalities of those surrounding them. This is called personal contagion. Many take on the color of their environment, and this should be guarded against, for it is a mild form of hypnotism. It is, of course, brought about through the suggestive power of unconscious mental action and may or may not be malicious. We should never allow ourselves to become controlled by anything that we do not consciously allow to enter the thought. If one feels an influence silently demanding action, he should at once declare that there is no power, in the flesh or out of it, that can control him except, of course, the one perfect mind. Obsession of discarnate spirits. If we are surrounded by discarnate spirits, they also might control us through suggestion. That is, if we allow them to do so. By thinking toward us with a strong desire, they might so implant this desire on the subjective side of our thought that it would come up from within, causing us to do certain things which we never consciously thought of doing. This, of course, is hypnotic influence. But all mental influence is hypnotic, varying only in degree. If it is true that discarnate spirits are around us, and it appears to be true, we should carefully guard against the possibility of any mental influence from them. The statement that only the one mind controls will protect us from any and all wrong mental influences of whatever nature, whether emanating from those in the flesh or out of it. General theory of obsession and mental influence. All obsession of whatever character is some form of mental influence and can easily be destroyed by making the above stated affirmation. We should never follow for one instant we should we should never for one instant allow the suggestions of other mentalities to control us. The one day will come when people will choose the thoughts that they allow to enter the mind as carefully as they now choose the food they eat. Staying close to the thought of the one mind is a safe and sure protection from any and all wrong mental influence. Insanity. Insanity is the complete control of the conscious mind by the unconscious or subjective mind. Dwelling too long on one idea or some sudden shock seems to produce this state. It is easily healed by knowing that there is but one mind and that it cannot forget itself. There is one mind in God, and this mind, our mind now. The psychic power must be controlled. The psychic power should always be under full control of the conscious mind. Otherwise, all sorts of influences may be picked up, which, operating under the guise of seemingly real individualities, control the one who admits it. When the psychic power is under full control of the conscious mind, it furnishes a wonderful storehouse of knowledge. 4. Being the seat of memory of both the individual and the race, it contains much that we do not consciously know. Normal state. A normal condition would be a complete balance between the objective and subjective mentalities. This would give an immediate access to all the wisdom of the human race, and might even extend much farther, for it could give access to a higher state, which is now more or less clogged by the contrary suggestions. The subjective side of thought is the sole and only medium between the relative and the absolute. If one were in control of his inner mentality, he could, at once, enter the absolute, and his every word would bear fruit. Jesus was such a one. In attempting to accomplish this, we do not have to come under control of any other power than that of our inner selves and our higher selves. Anything less than this is dangerous. Many seem to think that simply because they are under control, they must be dealing with spiritual power. No greater mistake was ever made. Jesus, who was fully illumined, always kept his full state of conscious thought and personal volition. The aim of evolution. The aim of evolution is to produce a man who, at the objective point of his own self-determination, may completely manifest the inner life of the spirit. Even the spirit does not seek to control us, for it lets us alone to discover ourselves. The most precious thing that a man possesses is his own individuality. Indeed, this is the only thing that he really has, or is. And for one instant, to allow any other influence to enter or control this individuality is a crime against man's real self. The state of trance. The trance state is any state of mentality that allows itself to become submerged. It varies in degree from simply allowing the mind to become receptive, which is harmless, to a complete self-denial of the objective consciousness, i.e., allowing any and all influences to be picked up. This is very dangerous. There are many normal psychics who can, while in a perfectly objective state, read people's thoughts and perform many other wonderful feats of the mind. This is normal, and no harm can come from it. It is, indeed, one of nature's ways of working and is most interesting. Normal psychic capacities. Any psychic power that can be used while in a normal state of mind is harmless and helpful. That is, any psychic power which can be used while one is in a perfectly conscious state of mentality. Many have this power and find that it is helpful as well as interesting. This power can be developed by knowing that the within and the without are really one. Abnormal psychic powers. Abnormal psychic powers are developed in the full trance state. That is, when the medium becomes controlled by surrounding influences. In this state, some wonderful and hidden powers of mind are revealed. In certain psychic states, people can see, hear, and read others' thoughts, travel abroad, and perform many other marvelous feats, which in the conscious state seem impossible. No doubt the time will come when all these powers will be under the control of the conscious mind. Man will then be much less limited. Clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is a state of mentality wherein the medium is able to see things that the objective eye cannot see under normal conditions. It is the physical eye reproduced on the mental side of life, only with a greatly extended vision. Time and space and obstructions are swept away, and the operator can easily look through a closed door as, in a normal state, he looks through a window. Psychometry. Psychometry is a clairvoyant state wherein the operator is able to psychometrize or read from the soul or subjective side of things. Mention has already been made of the fact that everything has its mental atmosphere, which is the result of the thoughts surrounding it. To psychometrize anything means to read from the mental atmosphere and to tell what it radiates. Sometimes the operator seems able to take a piece of ore or metal and give a perfect description of the location from which it was taken. This will explain why some mediums wish to hold an object which has been used by the sitter, for through this avenue, the medium is able to enter the inner thought of the person sitting. Clairaudience. Clairaudience may be called the ear of the soul. It is the ability to hear the inner voice speak, and is a most remarkable mental attribute. Some hear these voices silently, while to some they come as independent voices. It appears as though the instinctive man tries to tell the outer man of certain things, or to give him warnings. Sometimes these warnings come as visions, and sometimes in dreams. This power is uncertain and should be carefully watched, as we are not always able to tell whether the impression is real or simply some suggestion of a surrounding mental influence. A good way to test this is to know that all impressions must come from the perfect mind. Independent voices. Some independent voices speak forth, apparently from the air, and may be conversed with by the hour. I have talked with these voices, but so far have not been able to determine whether or not they ever hold anything beyond the subjective knowledge of those present. I have been unable to satisfy myself as to whether they were caused by those present in the flesh or whether they were caused by some form of spirit life. The fact remains that such voices do speak and that they are real. I have held animated and interesting conversations with such voices hours at a sitting, and it has been a most wonderful experience. But so far, it seems impossible to determine their exact nature. Time and a more complete investigation alone can give the real proof. Apparitions. Apparitions or thought forms often appear during mental stress. For instance, people often see some friend just before he passes from this life. Sometimes the apparition appears before the incident takes place. An explanation of this will be made later in this chapter. This type of phenomena is not at all uncommon. Nearly everyone has some record of such experiences. When one is asleep, he is entirely subjective, and this will explain why so many of the above referred to incidents take place during sleep. But impressions received while in the sleeping state do not always come to the surface. Ghosts and phantasms of the dead. People often see the forms of those who have passed from this life. Many have been alarmed over seeing such forms, as though there might be danger from them. But whether or not we believe them to be the forms of the dead or the living, they certainly can do no harm. It is claimed by some that ghosts are always the results of some form of violent death, and that those who pass out in a state of peace never leave a ghost behind. Of the truth of this statement, I am not absolutely sure, since all must leave behind the forms used while in the flesh, and each must leave behind him a thought form of himself. Ghosts sometimes can speak. It is a well known fact that ghosts sometimes have the ability to speak or convey some kind of a message to the living. And it is also generally conceded by those who have investigated such matters that once a ghost has had the opportunity to speak, it is seldom ever seen again. If we suppose a ghost to be a real entity, we can easily see how it could speak or telepathically convey a message. If, on the other hand, we assume that a ghost is only a form of thought, we can imagine that it might be equipped with the power to convey a message, after which it would gradually fade away. For thought has some power to express itself. I hold no brief for either case, since I have been unable to make up my own mind as to just what a ghost really is. In such a case as this, it is a mistake to assume anything other than the fact that such appearances do make themselves known to people under certain conditions. The matter will have to rest at this point until further investigation proves what a ghost is. Projecting the mentality. Under certain states of mentality, it is possible to project the mentality and travel far from the body. Just what it is that projects is difficult to say. And we are not so much concerned about what it is that projects as we are interested in the fact that there is something about the mentality which can project itself. Since there is but one mind, perhaps nothing has to project. Perhaps we simply see through the one mind, which must have and hold within itself all that is. Crystal gazing. Crystal gazing is a form of concentrating the mentality in such a manner as to make it possible for the subjective to come to the surface. The operator, looking steadily at it at a bright object, gradually becomes subjective and consequently able to read thought. Black magic. Black magic has been taught and practiced from time immemorial. It is the act of thinking towards someone for the purpose of doing him an injury. The modern curse. Today, black magic is called by another name, but a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Today, it is called malpractice. Malpractice takes several different forms, namely malicious, ignorant, and unconscious. Malicious malpractice is the act of arguing in mind that some certain person is something that he ought not to be. In some cases, it is supposed to even take the form of saying that he is not present in the flesh. If this were persisted in, and the one being damned should receive the condemnation, he might begin to feel sick. And if this were carried to a final conclusion, he would, perhaps, pass from this vale of tears. Mention is made of this, not as being something to fear, but as one of those things which today is being more or less discussed and believed in by many. So far as we are concerned, we believe only in the one mind, and we know that it cannot be divided against itself. This will settle the question of malicious malpractice for all time. We hear of people who live in constant terror of malpractice, and it seems certain that some do try to use this force to do injury to others. But no one with real understanding of this truth will be affected by it, no, nor seek to use it, for this would be playing with fire, and we are the servants of the things which we obey. If our thought is still operating on a level where such things are possible, we had better find it out, straighten out our thought, and be healed. For after all, malpractice is only wrong thought suggestion, and we do not believe in wrong thought suggestion. Ign- Innocence and ignorant malpractice causes much disease and discomfort. Through sympathy with sickness and fear for people's safety, we should sympathize with the one suffering, but never with that from which he suffers, for this would make him worse instead of better. Automatic writing. Automatic writing is an interesting phenomena of the mind. It is a mental control with which uses the arm and hand for the purpose of writing messages. There are several forms of automatic writing. One, the Ouija board, which is a small, smooth board upon which is written the alphabet. Upon this board is placed a small, pear shaped, three legged instrument, which points to the letters and spells out words. Another form is to put a pencil through the board, and still another form. And one even more interesting is when the pen is held in hand, which is controlled by some force not known, but supposed to be the subjective thought of either the operator or of someone present. Some believe that the arm is under control of a discarnate spirit. Many and long, many and long have been the discussions on this point, and I do not care to enter into them. But one thing is certain, the phenomena transpires, and many wonderful messages come through in this manner. Independent writing. The most interesting writing of all is what is called independent writing, that is, where the pencil simply tips up and writes without anyone touching it. I have seen this done and can vouch for its reality. Here, indeed, is ample cause for speculation, and we are compelled to admit that either some unconscious force of those present grasps the pencil or that some spirit force does. Hudson's theory. I am well aware of the theory which Hudson worked out along these lines, but I have not been able to explain everything on his basis, and I fear that he overworked his theory. His idea was that we have no right to assume the presence of an unknown agency when there is a known one present. In other words, he said that the phenomena is caused by some form of mental action which he called subjective, and that we have no right to assume a spirit to be the cause when we know that there are people present in the flesh, and that since people are in the flesh and And that since people in the flesh, as well as those out of it, have a mind, we must assume that the phenomena are caused by those present in the flesh. By the same token, and with the same logic, it could be proved either way that psychic phenomena are caused by some form of mental power. There can be no question, and the student of the workings of mind will rest content here, knowing that mental power can operate in independence of the physical instrument, for this is the great lesson to learn. Smelling where there is nothing to smell. A most peculiar and interesting phenomena takes place in the act of smelling, where there is, apparently, nothing to smell. The mentality, in connecting with the vibrations of a rose, can produce its odor independently of the presence of the flower. I have seen a case where the vibrations of a certain man were brought into the room where he was an intoxicated condition, where he was in an intoxicated condition. The smell of whiskey was so strong that the influence was asked to remove its presence. Perhaps this is what is meant by occult perfume, grasping objects without the hand. It is a commonly known fact that to those who have spent time investigating these things, that objects are grasped and held independently of the physical touch. This is known in independent writing and in telekinetic energy. Telekinetic energy. Telekinetic energy is defined as the ability to move ponderable objects without physical contact. This form of energy is displayed in that class of mental phenomena which cause objects to move without any physical agency, and is, therefore, caused by some form of mental energy or by some agency other than physical. Table tipping. Table tipping is so common as to cause but little comment, but it does help to prove a principle of mind, namely, that an object can be moved about from place to place without the aid of any physical contact. Wrappings. Wrappings on the wall and floor are also too common to mention, but should be classed in the category of telekinetic energy. Theory of ectoplasm. One of the investigators has advanced the theory of ectoplasm, which is a formless stuff emanating from the body of the medium. I have no doubt, but this theory is correct as far as it goes, but am not willing to advance it as being sufficient to explain all the phenomena. For instance, according to this theory, if anyone stands in front of the medium, the emanation is blocked and no results will follow. I have sat in a room and had a glass of water brought from another room and held to my lips while I drank it. It was a real glass and real water, and I was really there. And in a perfectly normal state, I could not possibly account for the above stated incident on the theory of ectoplasm, but I could account for it through the theory of mental power. Levitation. The theory of ectoplasm certainly will not account for levitation, where the body of the medium is lifted from a chair and carried to some other place in the room. This can be accounted for only on the theory that there is a power that transcends the better known physical laws. Experience has taught that there are many things in life that cannot be accounted for on another basis than that of a mind power which operates independent of any and of all physical agencies. Interesting thoughts. It is interesting to realize that we have such marvelous powers, and no doubt the time will come when we shall make common use of them. They are for some purposes, and as we live in a timeless universe, this purpose will be made known just as soon as we are ready for it. What is the cause? Whether psychic phenomena are caused by this agency of spirits or by some inner power of our own mentality makes no difference. That they are caused by mind power is apparent, for they are not caused by what we call physical force at all, but by some finer power than we, at present, well understand. Cause for thought. It gives reason for thought when we realize that such inner powers exist. Some power, independent of the body, can see, hear, feel, smell, touch, and taste without the aid of the physical instrument. Some power of intelligence within us can travel, communicate, project itself, recognize, and be recognized without the aid of the physical instrument. That there is a reason for this is certain, that this reason is natural and normal. No one can doubt, for nature is always natural, and only that is a mystery which is not understood. Time will prove all things. Time and experience alone will unravel the mysteries of the human mind, with its many and varied activities. So far, we have but touched the outskirts and of its garments. To deny these inner attributes is not only intolerant, but is downright ignorance. It is all right to say that we do not understand them, but to openly deny them is to place us not among the unbelievers, but among those who do not know the facts. The spirit of prophecy. Subjective mind can deduce only. It has no power of initiative, of self choice, and is compelled, because of its very nature, to retain any and all suggestions that it receives. The best illustration of this is in the creative soil, in which the gardener puts his seed. The soil does not argue nor deny, but goes to work on the seed and begins to create a plant which will represent the type of manifestation inherent as an idea in the seed. That is, from a cucumber seed, we get cucumbers, and from a cabbage seed, we get cabbages. Always the law maintains the individuality of the seed as it creates the plant. Never does it contradict the right of the seed to be what it really is. Involved within the seed is the idea of the plant, as are also those lesser ideas which are to act as a medium between the seed and the plant. Involved within the seed are both cause and effect, but the seed must first be placed within the creative soil if we wish to receive a plant. In the creative soil, or in the seed, the full and perfect ideas of the plant must exist as a completed thing, else it could never be brought forth into manifestation. The idea of the full-grown plant must exist somewhere in the seed and soil if it is ever going to materialize. A lesson in subjectivity. This teaches us a lesson in subjectivity. Thoughts going into the subjective are like seeds. They are concepts of ideas, and acting through the subjective medium of mind have within themselves the full power to develop and to express themselves. But how could they express unless they were already known to mind? They could not. And so mind must view the thought as already completed in the thing. And mind must also contain the avenue through which the idea is to be expressed. Every thought sets in motion in mind the fulfillment of its purpose, and mind sees the thing as already done. Mental tendencies set in motion cast their shadows before them, and a psychic often sees the complete manifestation of an idea before it has had the time to materialize in the objective world. This is what constitutes the average spirit of prophecy, for prophecy is the reading of subjective tendencies and seeing them as already accomplished facts. The subjective mind can deduce only, but its power of logic and sequence appears to be perfect. Explanation. For illustration, suppose that there is a window 1 mile away. I am throwing a ball at this window, and the ball is halfway to it, going at the rate of 1 mile a minute. Now you come in, measure the distance, compute the speed with which the ball is passing through the air, and say, the ball is halfway to the window. It is traveling at the rate of 1 mile a minute. In just 1/2 a minute, the window is going to be broken by the ball passing through it. Let us suppose that you are the only one who sees the ball, for the rest are looking at the window, and in 1/2 a minute it is broken. How did you prophesy that the window was to be broken? By drawing a conclusion, by drawing a logical conclusion of an already established premise. That is much like what happens when a psychic exercises a spirit of prophecy. They are generally unconscious as to why they do what they do, because they are getting their own subjective contact with the condition and simply interpreting what comes to them. But this is the logical deductive conclusion power of their subjective thought, seeing a thing completed by first seeing a tendency set in motion and computing the time that it will take to complete it. There are but few, however, who have any reliable spirit of prophecy. Let us carry this thought further. The race has its subjectivity from an individual to a nation. This is its karma, its subjective law set in motion. Each nation has its subjective causation, and the prophet of a nation could and would read its subjective tendency. And this is what the old prophets did, for they were mystics, every one of them, from Moses down. They were able to interpret the subjective causation of their race and so predict that certain things must follow. There is, however, a still higher spirit of prophecy, which but few have perceived, and those who have perceived it have been illumined. Within the subjective mirror of mind, there must also exist the divine and cosmic purposes, the very thought of God. An illumined person who is also psychic must read these great cosmic purposes, and in this manner, some of the great prophets have read the destiny of the race. They have told us that the destiny of man is divine, that he is immortal now, that he need not die to become immortal, but that he is immortal. It was in contact with this great law and from it that Moses received the Ten Commandments, the Mosaic law. It is through the avenue of subjectivity, which is the medium between spirit and man, between the absolute and the intellect, that all of the prophets have prophesied and all of the sages have taught, for it contains infinite wisdom, knowledge, and law. The subjective mind is the source of much inspiration, for it contains all the thoughts which the race has ever created. And at times one contacts these thoughts and becomes inspired by them. The subjective mind is the source of much revelation because it contains the purposes of God. And if the soul were to turn to the one, it surely would reflect into the outer mind the light of the eternal. Summary. We have shown that mind, independent of the body, can, and at times does, perform each and every function which we usually associate with the physical being. While most people may have to go into a trance state to perform these acts, there are a few who can produce the same results while in a perfectly normal state. That is, while in a self-conscious state. I wish to make this very plain, for there is a belief that an abnormal state must be entered into before these phenomena can be produced. I not only challenge such a statement, but entirely refute it as being altogether wrong. I have myself, while in a perfectly normal state, seen or experienced nearly everything that has been discussed under this heading. I am willing to admit that ordinarily a trance state is developed before the best results can be obtained. But to say that it must be developed is to contradict my own experience and refute my own observances. I have never, at any time, gone into a trance state and would no more consider doing so than I would consider jumping from the roof of a 10-story building. If, then, I were to refute my sanity during these experiences, by what manner of judgment could I consider myself to be sane at all? It is useless for those who know nothing at all about psychic phenomena to deny its reality. Excuse me. I can understand anyone saying that he does not understand it, but I cannot grasp the position of an individual who denies something of which he is entirely ignorant. We will say then that every act of the human instrument, which we call the body, can be reproduced through some agency which is not physical, or through some agency that physics cannot explain. We will call this agency some power of mind with which we are not yet familiar, with which we are not yet well familiar. It is all simple enough, anyway, for our bodies, could not move unless we were here to move them. And so every act is mental, even though we use the body as an instrument. I can find no explanation for the above stated facts unless we suppose that we have a mental body which reproduces the physical one and which can function without its counterpart and is entirely independent of it. I can find no explanation for the above stated facts unless we suppose that we have a mental body which reproduces the physical one and which can function without its counterpart and is entirely independent of it. It makes no difference whether we attribute the phenomena to spirits or whether we say that we are unconsciously producing it ourselves. The facts still remain that the phenomena are produced and can be accounted for only on the basis that we either have a mental body which acts independent of the physical one, or that the power of thought alone and without any physical instrument can operate upon matter. Personally, I prefer to accept the theory that we have a mental body, since this appeals to me as being more reasonable and certainly much more human. If we assume that spirits have the ability to move ponderable objects without physical contact, we are assuming that they have a mental body or that they operate their thought to produce the phenomena. For once, for once granted that the phenomena are really produced, it is self-evident that some kind of an explanation must be forthcoming. There are but two possible answers from what is today known: either the minds of departed souls or the minds of those present in the flesh produce the phenomena. This eliminates any other possible agency, but the theory of ectoplasm cannot answer all of the facts. Psychic phenomena and immortality. The meaning of immortality. Immortality means to the average person that the man shall persist after the experience of physical death, retaining a full recollection of himself and the ability to recognize others. If his full capacities go with him beyond the grave, he must be able to think consciously, to reason, will, affirm, declare, accept, reject, know and be known, communicate and be communicated with. He must be able to travel about, see and be seen, understand and be understood. He must be able to touch, taste, smell, hear, cognize, and realize. In fact, if he is really to continue as a self-conscious personality, he can do so only to the degree that he maintains a continuous stream of consciousness and self-knowingness. This means he must carry with him a complete remembrance, for it is to the remembrance alone that we must look for the link that binds one event to another, making life a constant stream of self-conscious expression. To suppose that a man can forget and still remain himself is to suppose that he could cut off the entire past and at this moment be the same personality that he was a moment ago. Remembrance alone guarantees self-personality. Individuality might remain without remembrance, but not so with personality. For what we are is the result of what we have seen, the result of what has gone before. Man, then, if he is to have an immortality worthy of the name, must continue, as he is now, beyond the grave. Death cannot rob him of anything if he be immortal. Where did man come from and why? It is useless to ask why man is. It can only be said of man that he is. For if we were to push his history back to some beginning, we should still be compelled to say that he is. If man's life is of God, then it comes from a source which had no beginning. And so the question as to why he is must forever remain unanswered. God could not tell why God is. To suppose that life could give an excuse or reason for being why would be to suppose an absurdity. Life is, and right at this point, all inquiry into truth starts. And from this point alone must this inquiry continue. We are not so much interested in why we are as we are interested in what we are, that we are some part of life. No one can deny and keep faith with reason. Let us not bother about questions that can never be answered, but pay attention to those which have an answer. Man awakes with a body. When man first woke to self consciousness, he had a body and a definite form, showing that instinctive life, which is God, had already clothed itself with the form of flesh. Body or form is the necessary outcome of self knowingness. In order to know, there must be something that may be known. In order to be conscious, there must be something of which to be conscious. Some kind of a body or expression there always was and always will be. If consciousness is to remain true to its nature, what is the body? Body is a concrete idea existing in time for the purpose of furnishing a vehicle through which life may express itself. The physical universe is the body of God. It is a manifestation of the mind of God. It is that creation which, while it may have beginnings and ends of itself, neither begins nor ends. The manifestation of spirit is necessary if spirit is to come into self-realization, hence body, matter. We say that body is composed of matter. But what is matter? Science tells us that matter is an aggregation of small particles arranged in some kind of form. We are also told that matter is in a continuous state of flow. Strange as it may seem, we do not have the same physical bodies that we had a few months ago. They have completely changed. New particles have taken the place of the old. And the old reason why they have taken the same form is that instinctive man has provided the same mold. Our bodies are like a river, forever flowing. The indwelling spirit alone maintains the identity. If we assure that immortality simply means persisting in the physical body, then we already have immortalized ourselves many times right here on earth. The ether of science. We are now being taught that the ether is more solid than matter. We know that the ether penetrates everything. It is in our bodies, at the center of the earth, and throughout all space. This means that within our present bodies there is a substance more solid than the body which we see. This idea is very far reaching, for it shows that we might have a body right within the physical one, which could be as real as the one of which we are accustomed to think. If instinctive man has molded the outer body in form, why should it not also mold the inner one into definite form? There is every reason to suppose that it does, and no reason to suppose the opposite. In all probability, there is a body within a body to infinity. In my Father's house are many mansions. We do not depart from reason when we assume this. For while we used to say that two bodies could not occupy the same space at the same time, we must remember that we were talking about not about only one plane of expression. The new idea of matter and ether has proved that more than one body can occupy the same space at the same time. For it has been proved that there is a substance which can occupy the same space that our body does. No doubt, as time goes on, it will also be proved that there is something still finer than the ether. This may go on to infinity. There is every reason to suppose that we have a body within a body to infinity. And it is our belief that we do have the resurrection body. The resurrection body then will not have to be snatched from some cosmic shelf as the soul soars aloft, but will be found to exist already within. Everything is from within, for life is within. The resurrection body of Jesus shone so that it could not be looked upon, because it was a more spiritual one than the physical eye is used to beholding. Conclusive facts. The facts are conclusive that we have a spiritual body now and do not have to die to receive one. We now remember the past and have already outlived the physical body many times during life. It looks as though we were already immortal and would not have to die to take on immortality. If there are many planes of life and consciousness, perhaps we only die from one plane to another. This thought makes a strong appeal and seems to answer the question completely. In what mental state do we go out? Some think that death robs us of the objective faculties and that we pass out in a purely subjective state. But we are unable to follow the logic of such an assumption. To suppose that the objective faculties die with the brain, is to suppose that the brain thinks and reasons. This is proved to be false through the experience of death itself. For if the brain could think, it would think on and on forever. No, the brain does not think. The thinker thinks through the brain, perhaps, but of itself. The brain has no power to think or feel. Detach the brain and it will not formulate ideas, nor work out plans. The thinker alone can think. It is logical to suppose that we pass from this life to the next in full and complete retention of all our faculties. Jesus revealed himself to his followers after his resurrection to show them that death is but a passing to a higher sphere of life and action, to know that we maintain an identity independent of the physical body is proof enough of immortality. This, together with the fact that remembrance maintains a constant stream of recollection and the realization that mentality can operate independently of the body, performing all of its normal functions without its aid, and that the new theory of matter and ether furnishes proof of the possibility of a body within a body to infinity, and that the instinctive man is constantly forming matter into the shape of a body, should prove to anyone that we are not going to attain immortality, but that we are now immortal. What causes psychic manifestation? It would be interesting to know whether the spirits of the supposed dead cause. All right, so it's not this. Y'all give me 1 second. Let me handle this Wi-Fi issue. I'll be right back. All right. Sorry about that, y'all. I am back again for the first time. All right. What causes psychic manifestations? It would be interesting to know whether the spirits of the supposed dead cause the manifestations which we see in the seance chamber. One thing is certain: these manifestations are either caused by those who are supposed to be dead, or else they are caused by those now in the flesh. For, since they happen, something must make them happen. Whether the manifestations are caused by the dead or the living, The agency used is either a mental body or the direct power of thought operating upon objects. Of course, in the conveyance of mental messages, telepathy explains the agency, but in physical manifestations, some kind of contact either takes place or else thought directly works on objects. Hudson, in his Law of Psychic Phenomena, carefully goes through an elaborate process of reasoning, the result of years of painstaking investigation, and completely proves that all of the manifestations do take place. He then goes through an extensive argument to show that they are not caused by spirits, saying that we have no reason to suppose the presence of an unknown agency when we know that there is one present who could be producing the phenomena. Now, if our reasoning power is correct, and it is proved that physical manifestations take place through some power that is mental, and if it is proved that those who have passed on might still be near us, then we cannot see where the argument against spirit agencies could be considered perfect. We are inclined to feel that the very facts in the case prove that these manifestations could be produced by either the living or the dead, and such we believe to be the case. Telepathy does not explain everything. Telepathy does not explain everything. It may explain much, but certainly not all. Telepathy could not explain certain visions which people sometimes have when passing out. We once knew a woman who practically passed out and was, indeed, thought dead for nearly a day and night, but was finally restored to consciousness to continue here for another year. She plainly saw and talked to several members of her family who had gone on some years earlier. It is not strange that those who have gone before are interested in us and wish to see us when we go over. If we had friends in London and were to send word that we were coming over, they would certainly wish to meet us. Our friends on the other side must be just as interested in us as they ever were. Telepathy cannot explain how Jesus could take some of his more advanced disciples aside and let them talk with the departed. It clearly states that this incident took place. And if we cannot believe this, how can we believe any of the other events in the life and experience of this most remarkable person? Spirit communication. There are thousands of cases on record where people have penetrated the veil of flesh and seen into the beyond. If we cannot believe the experience of so many, how can we believe in any experience at all? Of course, there is a large field for deception, and it is not probable that all communications are real. But to state positively that they are all illusions is to throw the lie into the face of human thought and say that is never sees clearly. There is certainly more argument and evidence in favor of the theory of spirit communication than against it. And so far as we are concerned, we are entirely convinced of the reality of this evidence. If spirit really exists, and if we are all if we all live in one mind, and if mentality can communicate with mentality without the aid of the physical instrument, then spirit communication must be possible. And since we know that the above stated facts are true, we have no alternative other than to accept the conclusive evidence and realize that while it may be difficult to communicate with the departed, yet it is possible. Communication must be mental. It is evident that any such communication must be mental. It would be thought transference or mental telepathy at best. Now, if the supposed entity knows that we wish to communicate with it, and if it is consciously present trying to communicate with us, then it must, by the power of its thought, cause its communication to come up through our subjectivity to an objective state of recognition. Consequently, how very difficult to receive a coherent message. For instance, suppose that one tries to think of a lecture to an audience. How much would they receive? Yet this is exactly what would happen under the very best condition if the departed were trying to impress our thought. I believe that they do seek to communicate with us and that they often succeed, perhaps more often than we realize. But I repeat, how difficult it must be. Whether or not the spirits are present is certain. Just because a psychic sees the picture of a person around us does not mean that he is really there. For the pictures of all our friends are always in our mental atmosphere. It is quite absurd to suppose that at any time we wish we can call anyone we ever knew and make him talk to us. We are unable to do so here. And psychological and metaphysical laws are the same on every plane. We do not control spirits. Suppose that we can compel the attention of one out of the flesh any more than of one in it is an absurdity. And if we could, what we would hope, what would we hope to gain? People out of the flesh know more than they did when in the body. I believe that we do communicate with the subjectivity of those who are departed, whether they know that we are doing so or not. But the messages that come in our present state of evolution are very incoherent. I believe that an unconscious communication goes on, more or less, all the time, and that those people whom we have greatly loved are still conscious of us and are, without doubt, seeking to influence us. But it could only be a mental influence. We might feel a vague sense, much as the niece of Peter did in The Return of Peter Grimm. She felt a vague sense of her uncle, that he was trying to impress her with his thought and desire. She felt a blind groping, and that is probably the best that we would get. The psychic power should not be forced. We all have psychic capabilities, but they should never be forced, for it is only when the subjective comes to the surface while in a normal state that a normal psychic power is produced. The average psychic must go into a semi trance to let the subjective come through. This is never good nor right, but is always destructive. The psychic capacity is normal only to the extent that it can be used while in a self conscious state. Don't misunderstand what I am saying. It is known as the power of darkness, but is all right if understood. Many people are bothered by their psychic powers, constantly seeing things, continually getting impressions. They are very near the surface of subjectivity, and it bothers them. They can easily be healed and should be. There is also psychic capacity, and some are able to discern mental causes with perfect ease. Jesus was such an one. He was able to tell the woman that she had been married 5 times and that the man with whom she was living was not her husband. He read that out of her thought, but he did it while in an objective state, for he was able to consciously and objectively exercise his subjective faculties. This is perfectly normal, but to let go of the volition and choosing faculties, which alone constitute individuality, and become immersed in subjectivity is very dangerous. One might become obsessed by discarnate spirits, earthbound entities, elementals, thought forms, desires, or other forces floating around. For we cannot close our eyes to the fact that all of these things do exist. It is a crime against individuality to allow the conscious faculties to become submerged. We should control the subjective and not let it control us. The teaching of the illusion of mind sprang up because men of wisdom perceived that people might mistake the shade of for the reality, the form for real substance, the hollow voice for revelation, and thereby be misled. That is why they warned against these things and against having familiar spirits. And they were absolutely right. Never let any voices speak to you unless you are in perfect control of the situation. Never admit any mental impressions or images that you do not wish to receive or that you cannot receive consciously. Say, there is no power in the flesh or out of it, but the one which can enter my consciousness. Anything that obeys the one conforms to the one, believes only in the one, and comes only through the consciousness of the one is perfectly welcome. But anything other than that cannot come. The only value that an understanding of psychic phenomena can have is that without it, we do not understand the complete workings of the mind. We do not understand experiences people often have. And in a consistent philosophy which deals with mind, the lack of an understanding of psychic phenomena would be inexcusable. For anyone in this day to say that powers of clairvoyance, telepathy, thought transference, clairaudience, and telekinetic energy are not exercised is to admit his own ignorance. These things do happen and are continuously happening in more and more instances. The thing to do is not to deny what happens, but to find a logical and scientific explanation of it. It is our business to explain all mental action insofar as it is explainable. And so we must find an answer which will cover the law of psychic phenomena, mind, with the laws governing it, is the whole answer. For each plane reproduces the one next to it, and psychic phenomena are reproductions of man's physical capacities on the mental plane. What is true on one plane is true on all. Note: read and carefully study Law of Psychic Phenomena, Hudson, Life After Death, Hislop, The Unknown Guest, Maeterlinck, Science and Immortality, Lodge, The Hidden Power, Troward, From the Unconscious to the Conscious, Gailey. Recapitulation. 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 Excuse me. Recapitulation. Psychic phenomena are the phenomena of the soul, or subjective mind. The subjective mentality is man's atmosphere and universal mind. It is the seat of his memory and the avenue through which instinctive life works. The subjective mentality, being deductive only in its reasoning, is compelled to retain all of the impressions that it receives. But of course, these impressions can be erased consciously. Man is universal on the subjective side of life, and in this way is connected with the subjectivity of all with whom he is in harmonious vibration. Mental suggestion operates through the subjective mind, and a silent influence is always going on through this avenue in the forms of race suggestion. A silent communication takes place at all times between friends on the subjective side of life. When it comes to the surface, it is called mental telepathy. The subjective mind, being in contact with the race thought, has a much greater knowledge than the conscious mind. It is through this avenue that human inspiration comes. Orators and actors contact the subjective side of their audiences and, in this way, wield a tremendous influence. Singers, poets, and writers enter the subjective race thought and interpret it. This enables them to depict the race emotions. Each person has a subjective mental emanation or atmosphere, which is the result of all that has ever been consciously or unconsciously said, thought, or done by that person. The mental atmosphere of a person is his power of attraction. It is the result of his inner thoughts. The mental atmosphere of a place is the result of all that has been thought, said, or done in that place. The mental atmosphere of a place is its power of attraction. We love those places whose mental atmosphere is one of love and peace. This is why we like our homes. The home should always be kept sacred, and its atmosphere should always be one of love. Things are possessed of a soul element and consciously emanate this atmosphere. Each city or town has a special atmosphere, which is the result of the mental emanations of those who inhabit it. The same may be said of nations. Each has a national mentality. The history of the whole race is subjectively written on the unseen walls of time and may be reproduced by one who can read the race mentality. Telepathy, which is the act of reading subjective thought, takes place through the medium of universal subjectivity. In order to mentally receive a message and bring it to the surface, one must be in tune with the vibration of that message. Since the whole field of subjectivity is universal, it follows that everything that has ever been thought, said, or done is retained in the race thought. And since this field is a unit, all of the vibrations are ever present and may be contacted at the point of anyone's mentality. In his objective state, man is separate and distinct, but on the subjective side of life, he is universal. The conditions necessary for the best results in psychic work are faith and expectancy. This is because the subjective mentality is the seat of the instinctive emotions and responds to feeling. A psychic, going into more or less of a subjective state, is able to enter the vibration of an individual's thought and read from the book of his remembrance. The personal reading seems to be limited to the subjective remembrance, although this is often very far reaching. Each maintains a stream of consciousness in the one mind, and anyone containing this stream may objectify it. Because of the universality of the medium, the individual stream of consciousness is always omnipresent, whether the one from whom it emanated be in the flesh or out of it. Time and space are unknown in mind, but time and space are unknown in mind. The past and present are one. In reading the thought of people set down in books, we enter their vibration. And in studying their thoughts, we enter their stream of consciousness. Everyone who ever lived on earth has left behind a mental picture of himself. These pictures are often seen when one is in a subjective state. This does not mean that we really see the person. What we see generally is the picture. The human aura is the mental vibration or emanation of the individual. The idea of the halo surrounding the heads of the saints is explained in this way. The personal atmosphere varies with the changing thought and emotion, and is sometimes pleasant and at other times unpleasant. Habits are formed through conscious thought becoming subjective, and in its turn, controlling the one through whom it operates. Mania is a strong desire, subjectified, which becomes an obsession. People may become obsessed with their own ideas or with those that operate through them from some foreign source, whether this source is from someone in the flesh or out of it. Obsession is always some form of mental suggestion. Insanity is the loss of subjective faculty of the objective faculty. The psychic power must always be controlled. A normal state is a perfect balance between the objective and the subjective faculties. This is the aim of evolution, to produce a man who, at the point of his objective faculty, may perfectly control the subjective. A trance state is abnormal, and only that psychic faculty is normal, which is under full control of the self discerning mind. Clairvoyance is the ability to see without the physical eye. Psychometry is a clairvoyant state wherein the medium is able to enter the subjective side of things and read the atmosphere surrounding them. This is why mediums often wish to hold some familiar object in their hands while giving readings. Clairaudience is the ear of the soul. Independent voices sometimes comes from the air, proving that some inner power is able to express itself audibly. Apparitions are thought forms and may come from the living or from the dead. At times they come as a warning. Crystal gazing is for the purpose of concentrating the mind in order that it may become subjective. Black magic, the curse of malpractice, all mean the use of thought power for destructive purposes. Automatic writing takes place when the arm is under control of the subjective mind of the operator or by the subjective mind of someone else, either in the flesh or out of it. It is a form of suggestion, either conscious or unconscious. Independent writing is where the pencil writes without physical contact. This shows that some inner power has the ability to grasp solid objects without physical contact. Table tipping and wrappings are from the same source. It is thought by some that these manifestations come from the agency of what is called ectoplasm, or a subtle emanation of the body. This theory, however, does not explain all of the facts. Mind alone can do this. Levitation, or the ability to move the body, is another fact well known to investigators. The power of prophecy is limited to some subjective tendencies already set in motion, for mental tendencies cast their shadows before them. There is a higher power of prophecy which contains the cosmic purposes and reads the thought of God. Man reproduces on the mental plane, and all of man reproduces on the mental plane all of the physical faculties. Immortality means the individual shall persist after the experience of physical death, carrying with him a complete remembrance and an unbroken stream of consciousness. For if man be immortal, death cannot rob him of anything. Man cannot conceive of himself either as being born or as dying. He lives and cannot think of himself from any other standpoint. Even though a person should conceive of himself as dying and imagine his own funeral, he would he would still have to conceive of himself as consciously being there, and so prove that he did not die at all. It is the same with birth. We can imagine being born into this world, but we cannot imagine the self as being non existent. For while thinking of the self as being born, we are consciously thinking, thus proving that we were before we were physically born. All inquiry into the truth starts with the self evident proposition that life is. When man first woke to the self consciousness on this plane, he already had a body. Consciousness always clothed itself in some kind of form. Matter, from which the body is made, is a fluent substance, forever taking the form that intelligence gives it. It flows in and out like a river. We yearly immortalize ourselves, so far as the body is concerned. The ether, being more solid than matter, proves that we could have a body within the one that we now occupy. Since matter and form is only a certain rate of vibration, it follows that, in dealing with infinite life, we are dealing with an infinite number of vibrations. Consequently, we might have a body within a body to infinity. In reality, the body is a spiritual idea. The flesh simply covers it for the purpose of providing a physical instrument through which spirit may function on this plane. Man departs this body only to find himself already equipped with another one. He carries with him every attitude that he now possesses and goes forth in complete retention of his individuality. Since there is but one mind, it follows that it is possible to communicate with the departed. But as the communication must come through the subjective, it is difficult to receive clear messages, and it is impossible to know whether or not the ones with whom we think we are communicating are consistently present. It is never safe to go into a trance state in order to communicate with the departed. As in so doing, one might subject himself to the mental influences of lesser mentalities. Individuality is sacred and must never be tampered with nor controlled, except by the conscious mind. The value of an understanding of psychic phenomena lies in the fact that they are the phenomena of mind and must be accounted for. Every plane reproduces the one just below or just above it. Psychic phenomena are the reproductions on the mental plane of the principle just below the mental, which is the physical. And that concludes the law of psychic phenomena. Powerful, powerful information there. Those trances, what we believe, what we know. These are the things that Ernest Holmes is going through in this chapter. We're experiencing these things on a daily basis. Very few of us are experiencing them because of choice, because of conscious choice. Very few of us are experiencing these phenomena because we are willing it to happen. The bulk of us are experiencing these things, because it's just kind of happening. We're pulling certain triggers, don't even realize we're pulling those triggers, and then whoop, it happened, and it happened in the blink of an eye, and then it's gone. And you're hoping that one day it'll happen again, tomorrow, maybe 5 minutes from now. This book is telling you how to achieve these abilities by will, by conscious will. But how do we get there? We get there by living by principles. We get there by listening. We get there by following directions. We get there by living maturity, accountability, responsibility, humility, and sacrifice. We get there by living love, compassion, and empathy. We get there by practicing meditation. We get there by allowing ourselves to let go of symbols. There's a lot of symbols that we have accepted throughout our lifetime. And many of us don't want to let those symbols go because those symbols construct our foundation. Well, to be able to go to the next level, you have to let go of those symbols. You have to free yourself of those symbols so that you don't have skeletons trying to ascend with you. If you want to ascend, if you want to go to that next level, you want to go to that higher levels of magnitude, you got to let go of what is in your cup. He's giving the answers. I hope that each and every one of you takes the time out to watch and to learn from what Ernest Holmes has given us, because these are the types of lessons that we need to be practicing. Not just that we need to read and that we need to share with our children and with our families. We need to be practicing these lessons. We need to put these into application on a daily basis. So yeah, I hope you do that. And I am going to go ahead and get me a little breaky break. And y'all expose your gift and be blessed.